Hello and welcome back to Culture Anthropology. In this lecture, we will talk about economics from an anthropological perspective. We'll talk about production, and then we will talk about distribution, and then for a little bit, we will talk about consumption. This lecture will be a little different. My little box of my head won't be on it throughout the whole lecture, so you won't have to look at me throughout the whole thing. The economic anthropology is the study of economics from a cultural perspective. Economic anthropology has its root back in the middle part of the 20th century. However, anthropologists have always been interested in the way that people produce things and people distribute things. This lecture will begin with a little bit of history of economic anthropology and how the discipline of economics has informed anthropologists and also changed the discipline of economics itself through anthropological research. Prior to the 1950s, anthropologists tended to look at all the cultures as having similar economics. So what this meant is they applied the concept of neoclassical economics, which are Western economics, with all cultures throughout the world, and they would compare their cultures to neoclassical ideas. So neoclassical economics were influenced by the ideas of Adam Smith in the 19th century. His book, The Wealth of Nations, is the foundation of capitalist trade nowadays. According to Adam Smith, individuals will maximize their utility and always do what's best for them. And if that happens, this creates free markets, which will always right themselves, which he came up with was the invisible hand of the market. It would always right itself because there would always be competition. However, in the 1960s, 1950s, anthropologists that were studying non-market economies, economies of tribes and smaller scale societies, they found that neoclassicalism tends to ignore the influence that society and culture have on economics. Karl Polanyi was one of the first economic anthropologists to begin to criticize looking at other cultures' economic patterns through a Western lens, and he came up with the idea that all economies are actually embedded within the society, which means that it's not just an economic exchange by itself, but there's actually human relations within that economic exchange that will affect it. And he believed that capitalism will always be contested by cultures. Capitalism will always be at odds with cultures that don't use a neoclassic model. So capitalism itself is the culmination of neoclassicism, of the idea that we will always do things to the better of our own utility. This also led to studies about affluence. So Richard Borshay-Lee, which we talked about in the last lecture, who studied the Dobe of Africa, found that they don't work as much as we thought they would, and at the same time, affluence is not the same as we think of as affluence. Marshall Sahlins wrote in the 1950s the original Affluent Society, and it talks about how affluence is different in every culture. It's not necessarily the accumulation of wealth per se. You could actually be considered to be, quote, rich and not be what we would consider wealthy. You may not be hoarding resources. And Man the Hunter was the book that Borshay-Lee wrote that we talked about in the last lecture. So these anthropologists were really led by the idea of the Marxian. So these anthropologists were really led by the Marxian theories of economics. Following the 50s, there was a blossoming of ideas of economics. Prior to that, with if you know anything about McCarthy and McCarthyism, many professors, especially anthropology professors that did not agree with neoclassical economics, tended to get booted out of colleges. So after the ending of this, into the 60s and the 70s, people began to do research, economic research of pre-industrial societies, what we would call, quote, primitive societies, less complex societies, using Marxian economic theory. So the nice thing about Marxian economic theory is that it includes those that may not be able to own the surplus or the means of production.
So what the means of production are the things that you use to produce, so the factories and resources. And in this theoretical framework, you have two sides. You have the people that own the means of production. They have the tools, the skills, the organization, the technology. They have all the stuff to make the resource. And then on the other side, you have the labor. And all the labor people have that are labor is their labor. And they give that to the people that own the means of production. So in turn, they can have a salary, which just makes sense. We all understand this concept. So labor goes to them, salary comes back. Now, in some economies, the worker has the labor and also owns the means. We talked about egalitarian societies. In egalitarian societies, everyone has equal access to all the resources. So if that was an industrial society where they're making a product, then you would have 100% profit when it comes back to the people. And this is where kind of the revolutionary idea of Marxian economics comes from. But when we're doing social science, we're not thinking of it from a revolutionary perspective, but just from a framework where we can put things in place. So we're going to focus on the two main concepts in economics of production and distribution. And then we'll touch a little bit on exchange. First of all, production. So production is taking raw materials and making them a product, making them useful for people to use. And we're going to talk about the mode of production. We're going to talk about multiple modes of production. And modes of production are just the way that societies organize how they make things, either through laws or through cooperation. The first type of mode of production is domestic mode of production. This is usually tribal societies, bands. It's called domestic or kin-ordered because everything is done usually within a family or within a house or within the tribe itself. There's collective ownership of all the resources, the gardens, anything that's used to make things. This is usually among foragers and horticulturists. And among a large amount of pastoralists. The next type of mode of production is tributary mode of production. Within this mode of production, the means of production, the things to make things, are owned by a ruling class, or they could be owned by a state, and a portion of that is given back to the ruling class or to the state. So, for example, in medieval Europe, the lord would own the field, and the peasant would work the field, and then the peasant would give a certain amount of that back to the lord. Then there's the capitalist mode or capitalist industrial mode of production. So this is the mode of production that came about in the early 19th century, or late 19th century, I should say. This was in the early 20th century. Through this type of mode of production, the means of production are actually owned by a person. They're privately owned. And classically, capitalist mode of production or industrial mode of production was driven by the idea of Fordism. So what Fordism is the idea that the people that work for you are able to afford the product that's coming off of the assembly line. So obviously this is not a concept that's carried out much today. We're past this idea of this capitalist industrial mode of production. Not everyone that's making things can actually afford to buy them. We are currently in the post-industrial mode of production. This relies heavily upon the service industry. So a lot of the people that do things nowadays don't actually make a product. It's not really, they're not taking raw materials and turning them into something that can be used by people. The things that they're making cannot physically be held onto. The things that they're making are ideas and knowledge. It's not to say that people aren't still making things, but the things, they're not in the same type of capitalist industrial mode of production that we were at the turn of the century. They can't afford the things they're making, and the things that are being made are not being sold in the same place they're being made. There's been a lot of critical research done about the modes of production. these last four were the traditional ones, where you had domestic, you had tributary, you had capitalist, and you had post-industrial. Now the whole work is split into a division of labor models. A while ago, Eric Wolf, anthropologist, wrote a book called Europe and the People Without History, and it talks about how this concept of all these modes of production have left out certain people. And now when we think of the workers may be in another country. So we have what are called core, semi-periphery, and periphery countries, where where cheap labor and raw materials come out of other countries, and the companies in the core countries make high profit goods that are sold throughout the whole world.
This idea of a world-based division of labor, where different countries do different things, where some countries own the means of production and other countries provide labor, was proposed in the 1970s by Emanuel Wallerstein. It's called world systems theory. And when we talk about development, we'll delve a little deeper into world systems theory and talk about dependency theory, where periphery countries are always dependent upon the core countries. And there's a lot of people in the world that are from these other countries, the periphery countries, and also in our own society that don't quite fit into the modes of production we talked about before. And because of all this research that was done by Wolf and other people that have studied people that don't fit into the categories, we've come up with a new category called the peasant or articulating mode of production.
And the reason why it's called articulating is because, first of all, these people may possibly grow their own food for subsistence. And at the same time, they may grow cash crops. So this picture here is of a man in Central America growing coffee. But many will also work wage jobs along with farming. So this here is a woman working in a banana plantation. Some people may migrate from their homes for a long amount of time. They may actually migrate all over to the United States or to other more developed countries. And at the same time, rents are paid for land, so they don't own their land. And the reason why this is because throughout the last century, the vast majority of people that live in countries that operate within this articulating mode of production, foreign countries have actually come in and bought up all their land. And this has been the case through almost every Latin American country and African country.
This is a video that talks about this in Guatemala in the 1950s.
The United Fruit Company of Boston owned 500,000 acres of land, the railroad, the port, and telecommunications. But most Guatemalan peasants found it difficult to survive. In 1950, Jacobo Arbenz was voted president. He wasn't a communist, but some of his close allies were. A former military man, Arbenz sought to modernize Guatemala's backward society. Washington was alarmed.
What we were faced here with the obvious intervention of a foreign power, because these homegrown parties are not really homegrown. They're being funded or advised by a foreign power, i.e. the Soviet Union.
Я абсолютно убежден в том, что правительство Арбенса,
the Arbenz government, which had been in power from 1950, didn't enjoy any logistical support from the Soviet Union.
поддержкой со стороны советского правительства. И даже
We didn't even have diplomatic relations.
установлено дипломатических отношений между нашими государствами.
There was no Soviet mission in Guatemala.
Советского представительства.
President Arbenz started a land reform program, buying up fallow land to distribute to peasants. In compensation, he offered the landowners the values they had themselves declared for taxes. United Fruit was offered just over $1 million for its land. When Arbenz declared nationalization, the company, backed by the United States, claimed $16 million.
Vio que yo no me puse contento.
He saw that I didn't look very pleased.
Y me dijo que He said, "Aren't you happy about the news?" And I replied, "Now we're going to have to fight on two fronts. We're going to have to fight internally against the landowners and also against the United States."
My counterpart, the Guatemala City Chief of Station, was sending in reports too about communist infiltration in the government. And of course he mentioned Jose Manuel Fortuny and some of the old-time Stalinist communists who were gaining favorable positions in the Arbenz regime.
In this impasse, the US named John Purifoy as its new ambassador. Purifoy had had experience of communist efforts to gain power in Greece.
Purifoy said to Arbenz, "Mr. President, we can sort out all this business of the United Fruit Company so that you can come to a satisfactory agreement with them. The United Fruit Company is not the problem. The problem is the communists that you have in your government."
Nada menos que John Foster Dulles, que era el secretario.
No less a figure than John Foster Dulles, head of the State Department, was part of the firm of lawyers acting for the United Fruit Company. His brother Alan was the head of the CIA. So it didn't take much of an effort on their part to persuade their president, a military man, Mr. Eisenhower, to give them the green light to overthrow Arbenz's government.
U.S. Secretary of State Dulles takes the rostrum to urge united action by the Americas to outlaw international communist intervention in the Western Hemisphere.
This conference was shocked by the dastardly attack on members of the United States Congress by those who professed to be patriots. They may not themselves have been communists, but they had been subjected to the inflammatory influence of communism, which avowedly uses extreme nationalism as one of its tools.
Arbenz once again put on his colonel's uniform as Guatemala prepared for war. In Esquipulas, an important religious shrine in a very Catholic country, the church helped organize the opposition to Arbenz. A CIA operation, codenamed PB Success, mobilized disaffected exiles and peasants into action.
What we wanted to do was have a terror campaign to terrify Arbenz particularly, terrify his troops, much as the German Stuka bombers terrified the population of Holland, Belgium, and Poland at the onset of World War II, and just rendered everybody paralyzed.
The UN met in emergency session. Guatemala City was strafed from the air. Rebels invaded from Honduras. The CIA spread panic. Washington denied responsibility.
The information available to the United States thus far strongly suggests that the situation does not involve aggression, but is a revolt of Guatemalans against Guatemalans.
The Soviets were warned.
Stay out of this hemisphere, and don't try to start your plans and your conspiracies over here.
The American PB Success campaign brought the government down and drove Arbenz and his wife into exile. 9,000 of his supporters were arrested. Many were kept in jail without trial for years.
They even set up anti-communist committees where anyone could go and give the names of people who had been loyal to the revolution. These people would then be mercilessly kidnapped, killed, and so on.
People in the articulating mode of production, they move in and out of what is known as the formal and informal economy. So the formal economy, obviously, is the economy that is taxed. The informal economy are things that are done under the radar. And according to most research, most people in the world operate outside of the formal economy. If you look at this chart down here, 1.8 billion people actually operate outside of the formal economy. So that's production. So next we're going to talk about distribution. There's three main types of distribution that anthropologists have categorized. The first one is reciprocity. So reciprocity is literally exchanging one thing for another, and it can be things, and it can also be labor. Secondly, we have redistribution, where we take all the goods and we put them in one place, and then they're redistributed out at a later time. And the third time is commercialization, where goods actually have prices. So, and those prices are all dependent upon the amount that we have or how much people want them. And these are commodities. This is when things become commodities. A commodity is a thing that has a value that is beyond its use value. So it's not just a baseball. The baseball is actually worth more because it has a stamp of the Detroit Tigers on it. It becomes a commodity then. It's no longer just a baseball. It's beyond the baseball.
Because people want to buy it for more than just plain baseball.
So first we'll talk about reciprocity. There's three main types of reciprocity. There's three main types of reciprocity. The first type is generalized reciprocity. So generalized reciprocity is gift giving, giving without the expectation of getting something back. The Kalahari Bushmen practice this. We practice this when we give birthday presents, supposedly. The idea of this came from Marcel Mauss, who was actually the nephew of Emil Durkheim, who we talked about with Solidarity and social organization. He wrote a book called The Gift, and The Gift explored other cultures that actually give things as part of their economy. And they don't expect anything in return when they give these things. Now they know something will eventually come back, but it's not expected. This is really hard to explain from the ideas of Adam Smith, where we will always work for our own utility. We'll always try to find the best deal. We'll always try to get as much as we can. It doesn't make sense. Some people think that this may be a result of living in places where things may be scarce, where we may not be. There's an unpredictability of whether we may be able to eat or not, and this may be the case in places like Kalahari. And the Bushmen, when they kill an animal, they may a lot of times they'll bring it back to the community, and the rest of the community will actually mock them for how small the animal is. I mean, they'll make fun of them, even if it's the biggest one they've ever seen, because that's part of the process of you give and you don't expect anything in return. So he gives it away, but he knows eventually that someone else will shoot an animal the same size at one time and give that away to the rest of the society or the community. And some people think it just may make people happy, and it may actually just make people happy. It may create a happy community. The Rastafarians, what you read about, they practice what's known as a moral economy, which is a type of generalized reciprocity. Within a moral economy, there's certain things that you just do. You're expected to do. You have to do them. This has also been used amongst drug users. Drug users have moral economies where if someone's in withdrawals, you're going to help them out and get them out of it. You guys will read an article about the moral economy of meth using, crystal meth using, about a researcher that studied that. Now, don't get me wrong, with those Rastafarians, it's not about drugs. Within their community, there's an obligation to give to people. This is why they had a problem with Bob Marley and Tough Gone Records, it says in the book, because they didn't feel like they were giving enough back to the community with this type of generalized reciprocity, these networks of solidarity. The second type of reciprocity is negative reciprocity. So negative reciprocity is what we would call bartering. It's trying to get as much as you can for as little as possible, and being a little bit of a used car salesman. Dickering is a type of negative reciprocity. So I'll give you this if you give me that, when you know that the thing that you are giving them is worth more. This is a lot of traditional societies have used negative reciprocity. This is something that has been used in our own society years ago. You go to the doctor, and the farmer will offer maybe some food to get taken care of by the doctor. So it's negative reciprocity. And then we have balanced reciprocity. So with balanced reciprocity, you're always giving with expecting to get the same amount back. The classic anthropological example of balanced reciprocity would be the Trobriand Islanders and their Kula ring. The Kula ring, which was studied by Bronislaw Malinowski, which you learned about when we talked about participant observation, has to do with necklaces, shell necklaces, and armbands that are moved around in a circle between these islands. This is something that's done among the elite, and it's a type of economic exchange where you're always going to get back something in value of what you've given. And this is a little clip out of a movie about Malinowski that talks about it.
Despite this inner turmoil, his work of participant observation was about to pay off. 6 months after arriving, Malinowski began to study an ancient tradition that really intrigued him. He noted that every few months, islanders would build fleets of elaborately decorated canoes as part of a tradition known as kula. For kula, they set out on voyages, leaving behind friends and family for months at a time. And kula voyages from neighboring islands would be awaited with great anticipation.
What you would see over the horizon, these tiny, tiny canoes converging until there might be 60 or 80 or possibly 100. You will suddenly see people on the island start going into the sea to meet these canoes. And as the canoes come nearer, the people going into the sea will recognize individuals on the canoes.
Kula visitors were treated to great feasts, attracting hundreds of locals to these celebrations. Particularly striking were the risks the islanders were prepared to take for kula, as Malinowski himself discovered late one night sailing between islands.
We passed very close by a coral island, the sea smashing against the rocks. The islanders were all shouting, trying to control the craft. I was terrified. I started to think of Elsie, sleeping peacefully, and that I might never see her again. Once, the crews of a whole fleet of Trobriand canoes were captured, killed, and eaten by the inhabitants of unknown villages. And let's not forget the perils of simply sailing these seas. The reefs, sandbanks, and coral rocks waiting to smash the fragile canoes. The horror of it. All in the pursuit of kula.
These islanders, it seemed, risked everything for kula. And strangest of all, the reward for these perilous journeys was the exchange of flimsy shell trinkets. Kula was time-consuming and dangerous, all for something that seemed apparently pointless. Malinowski made it his goal to discover what it was about kula that was worth risking your life for. Over the following months, he explored kula from every angle. He questioned the locals, watched the rituals, and tried to make sense of it all. Gradually, the secrets of Kula began to unfold.
There is such nonchalance in the men arriving for Kula, and nonchalance in the old men receiving them. They come, they sit on the canoe, they chatter and haggle, give in. I eat my rice and kippers and read my Kipling. We talk some more, and gradually I manage to drag out the information I'm after.
The information that he dragged out of the locals revealed a complex and sophisticated ritual. First, there were the people who took part.
Only important men could actually afford to go on a Kula expedition, partly because this meant commissioning a canoe, so it meant some sort of outlay.
Malinovsky soon discovered that Kula was almost exclusive to the tribal chiefs and men of rank. These VIPs were connected by Kula to a social network that reached far beyond the Trobriand Islands. And at the heart of Kula were the shell trinkets.
In order to establish relationships with other people, you have to establish relationships with something. And these valuables are the means through which you establish relationships. And this means that people go on large expeditions to go and fetch valuables from elsewhere. They receive people who bring valuables to them, and the result is if you link up all these relationships, suddenly you find you're in a huge chain of relationships. And this chain of relationships actually spreads across a large island area.
Malinovsky uncovered a complex network of Kula exchange, covering 12 island groups spanning 200 miles of ocean. He also discovered why the shell necklaces and bracelets were so highly prized. Each one had a value that came from its unique history as it passed from person to person and from island to island. The value of each object lay in the renown of its former owners.
This is a history of relationships, and what he wants to know is who has had this before, and to whom he's going to, and when he passes it on, his own name will, in a sense, be part of the history of the item.
So these weren't simply shell trinkets. Each chain of shells was a potent symbol of power and prestige. Malinovsky's participant observation had revealed that, far from being pointless, Kula played a vital role in Trobriand society, reinforcing the status of the rich and famous.
This is quite a ranked society, and poorer people simply didn't enter into the Kula exchanges. So this was renown and prestige that were there for those who already had renown and prestige. I mean, it sounds familiar, yeah.
And like a trophy won in battle, owning a piece of Kula made you a hero.
So the second main type of distribution is redistribution. With redistribution, everything goes to a main place, and then it's redistributed throughout the society. The classic example of this would be the Kwakiutl Indians of northwestern United States, or northwest, actually even further up, Alberta, Vancouver. And this is a movie that shows an example of redistribution in modern time. For a while, potlatch was considered to be illegal. And in the middle of this movie, there's a little thing patched in that talks about Franz Boas, who studied the Kwakiutl, going up there to study them, and then making sure that he's not going to tell on them, so the government, so they get in trouble for following potlatch. They didn't like people doing potlatch because when you just start getting rid of all of your stuff and you're wealthy, this causes some issues with, obviously, with taxes and things like that.
Born to be a chief, it was James Seaweed's role to give potlatches, share his wealth. Now, 63, he has become a great chief by giving more, a lifetime of struggle to pass on to the young a knowledge of their past. Long before the coming of the white man, the Kwakiutl people lived along the coastal waters of Western Canada and Vancouver Island. Here they built a rich and virile culture, told in spectacular art and centered on the potlatch giveaway, for generosity brought honor to the giver. On great formal occasions, a chief gathered his wealth and invited guests from many villages. Through days of singing, dancing, and feasting, he lavished canoes, blankets, and other gifts on his guests according to rank. The more he gave, the greater his prestige. Prodded by missionaries, the Canadian government banned the potlatch in 1876. Illegal until 1951, the potlatch was held only secretly and at great risk.
Dr. Boaz, we want to know whether you have come to stop our dances and feasts, as other missionaries and agents who live among our neighbors try to do. We do not want anybody here who will interfere with our customs. Is this the white man's land? We are told it is the Queen's land. But no, it is ours. Where was the Queen when our God gave the land to my grandfather and told him, "This will be yours"? Do we ask the white man do as the Indian does? No, we do not. Why then do you ask us, do as the white man does? It is a strict law that bids us dance. It is a strict law that bids us distribute our property among our friends and neighbors. It is a good law. Let the white man observe his law. We shall observe ours. Now, if you are come to forbid us to dance, leave us. If not, you will be welcome.
Alert Bay. Here James Seaweed was born. Here as a boy he heard the old legends. Today it is the center of the revival of Kwakiutl arts. Under the hands of a new generation of Indian artists, the stylized figures of ravens, bears, killer whales, or beavers again emerge on cedar masks and totem poles. After the ban against the potlatch was finally lifted, James Seaweed planned a structure where the Kwakiutl ceremonies could be presented. In 1965, he completed the first traditional community house of the 20th century. Here he acts as head singer for a potlatch at which a young chief, Amos Dawson, will take on his hereditary names, titles, and dances. After a year of preparation and a cost of $15,000 in savings, Amos Dawson has invited his family clans to share in a great potlatch.
Not very often a young man, like this young man, he likes to share his wealth with his people. That's our culture. The wealth of a chief always shares his wealth with his people. And this is what he's done tonight.
To James Seaweed, his life has brought calm. At 63, he knows that what matters most is not what you take from life, but what you give to it.
We call ourselves the people. We have a strong connection to the land, to each other, and how we deal with each other and how we relate to each other is all that we're a clan system, that we're divided into 2 moieties, and then we have separate clans, sub-clans under each moiety. Under the Wolf clan, we have Yanyedi, which is my clan, and then we have Daklawedi. They use eagle. And under the Raven moiety, we have Kokitan. They use the raven as their crest. We have Ishkitan. They use the frog. And then we have Deshitan. They use the split-tailed beaver. And we're a potlatch society, which means that potlatch and matrilineal and moiety base. So those are a lot of ///. But the reason why I say that we're moiety base is because, and it deals with potlatch, is that both sides relate to each other. We're separate and distinct, but we can't survive without the other side. And so it's a very interconnected society. Even though we're separate clans and separate moieties, we're still connected to each other through marriage and through interrelations. And that all comes out in a potlatch. When one moiety throws a potlatch, the other moiety sits and they get served. And then that favor that is always returned when the other clan, when the other moiety throws a potlatch. It's always about giving and receiving. We just had one here recently for my grandmother and my younger brother. It's called a headstone potlatch, and it's given after a period of time after the funeral when the person passed away. So my grandmother, she passed away back in January, so we just recently had our headstone potlatch. My younger brother, he actually passed away a long time ago, but he's in Thunder Bay, and just circumstances, we never got around to putting a headstone down. And it was always something that was left unfinished. And I think the reason why our people and our elders have taught us that a headstone potlatch is healing, it's closure. It's your period of mourning is over, and it's a time to celebrate and to remember the good life that this person lives, and the good memories that they left behind, and that their spirit is returned to the great river. And a lot of times the spirit comes back and returns to our people. And so the headstone potlatch is saying it's okay, you can continue on now.
Then the third kind is commercialization. So commercialization means that you have money. So you have what's known as general purpose money, which is non-domestic labor, the labor that happens outside the home. So when you raise your kids, you don't get paid any money for that. But when you go outside your home and you do labor, someone gives you money to actually do that labor, and in return of that, you get general purpose money. You use this general purpose money to buy the things you want, and that is the way that we exchange within commercialization. At the same time, things become commodified. So products become worth whatever that money is. And the things that we make become worth what that money is. And the more you work, and the more you're given the general purpose money, the more things you can actually purchase and consume. And it's driven by consumption. We tend to think that people consume because they need things. Behavior ecologists have said you're genetically programmed to actually need things that are in your environment, and that you will always make enough money to be able to purchase them. But this doesn't explain how we consume in our society. We use what's called conspicuous consumption. We buy things we don't need all the time. This is not always a negative thing. Sometimes we will actually put solar panels on our McMansion. But our economy has become something that has become unique, and it's become global. And the next lecture we will talk about development. We'll talk about how we've taken these ideas of the market economy and consumerism, and we've taken them and made them a global economy. And the Western world has tried to develop the whole world into this market economy. And a lot of anthropologists have been working on trying to figure out ways to measure how well this works, to measure the effects of this on other countries, the effects of this on cultures, sometimes to make sure that it works well in other countries, other people, amongst other societies. And the next lecture will dive deeper into what these types of economics, what economic development means for people around the world.